People often ask why Iran and the US are locked in permanent hostility, why nothing ever seems to reset, why every diplomatic opening feels temporary and fragile. The usual answer points to the Ayatollah, to religious extremism, or to culture. That answer is incomplete. In the early 1950s, Iran had something very rare in the region: a democratically elected prime minister. His name was Mohammad Mossadegh. He wasn't a radical and he wasn't anti American. His core demand was simple and broadly popular: Iran should control its own oil. At the time, most of Iran's oil profits flowed to British companies, while ordinary Iranians saw little benefit. Mossadegh pursued nationalization through legal and parliamentary means. This wasn't a revolution, it was a constitutional dispute over sovereignty. Britain saw that move as an existential threat to its economic interests and its global standing. Losing control over Iranian oil risked encouraging similar demands elsewhere. Instead of accepting the loss or negotiating a new arrangement, British officials began discussing how to remove Mossadegh from power. They took that proposal to the United States. Now, this was the early Cold War, when American foreign policy treated uncertainty as danger. Even neutral countries were viewed through the lens of political loss to Soviet influence. From Washington's perspective, instability mattered more than process. Control mattered more than consent. That calculation led to a covert operation in 1953, later known as Operation Ajax. Mossadegh was removed. The Shah, who previously ruled with limited authority, was restored and empowered. On paper, Iran still had institutions. In practice, something fundamental changed. Democratic legitimacy collapsed in a single moment. Political authority no longer rested on public consent. It rested on force, surveillance, and foreign backing. This is where the story is often simplified, and that simplification hides the real lesson. Iran did not immediately become a closed medieval society. In the 60s and 70s, Iran modernized rapidly. Universities expanded, women attended classes, entered professional life, and appeared openly in public. Cities grew, infrastructure improved, consumer culture spread. To outside observers, Iran looked stable, modern, and aligned with the West. Those images are real, they matter, and they confuse people today. What those images don't show is what was missing. The Shah ruled with an iron fist. Political dissent had nowhere to go. His secret police, Savak, translated to the Bureau for Intelligence and Security of the State, disappeared countless political enemies. That repression intensified in the 70s. The Shah saw that opposition parties were dismantled and independent media was suppressed. Elections existed, but they were a sham. People could live modern lives, but they couldn't shape the system governing them. You could work, study, and travel, but you couldn't organize, challenge power, or replace leadership peacefully. That combination is unstable. When social life opens but political life closes, pressure builds. People don't stop wanting those choices. They simply stop believing they can get them through normal channels. Over time, reformers lose credibility. Moderates lose ground. The only groups that retain legitimacy are those outside the state, untouched by its compromises and protections. In Iran, that space belonged to religious leadership. Mosques weren't just places of worship, they were networks, they were independent. They survived repression because they weren't built into the state. As opposition to the Shah grew, political language shifted. Liberal and democratic ideas were increasingly associated with a system seen as imposed and protected by foreign powers. Religious leaders could present themselves as authentic, independent, and morally uncorrupted. That's how figures like Ruhollah Khomeini gained influence. By the time 1979's revolution arrived, the range of possible outcomes had narrowed. Decades of suppressed political expression had eliminated gradual reform as an option. What remained was rejection, not just of the Shah, but of the entire system he represented. The revolution wasn't inevitable in the abstract, but given the choices made earlier, it became increasingly likely. The United States didn't create the Ayatollah. It didn't script the revolution, but it helped create the conditions that made that outcome possible. Removing a democratic government solved the short-term problem. It also discredited democracy itself in the eyes of many Iranians. That trade-off mattered more than anyone involved understood. This is where the moral argument becomes unavoidable. The overthrow of Mossadegh wasn't fate or culture. It was a choice. It prioritized control over self-determination, stability over legitimacy. And while it delivered predictability for a time, it produced consequences that proved far harder to manage. When powerful countries decide another nation's future, they don't control how the story ends. They only control how it begins. And the effects of that beginning can last far longer than the people who made the decisions ever expected. It's a prime example of the United States creating its own mortal, sworn enemies. Thank you for spending time with us today. If you value this kind of work, please like and subscribe. I'm Mike Burns, and this has been the Knuckleball.